welcome panelists. So we have Casey, Fen, and Jack. Can you please go through and introduce yourself, your name, your pronouns, and perhaps share a little bit about what you're working towards currently?
I can go first. My name's Casey. I use they, them, and they, them pronouns, and I am a PSEO student right now.
My name is Fen. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm currently working towards a degree in journalism.
Hi, my name is Jack. I use he, him pronouns, and I am currently just working towards pretty much getting some debt out. I'm doing a lot of just hourly work, if that makes sense.
Nice. Thank you. Appreciate you introducing yourselves. Our first question is, what can leaders do to make people feel comfortable when coming out? And first we'll have KC respond, and then Jack will respond.
So thinking about coming out, the most important thing to me when I'm coming out to someone is that they're actively listening, because it's a big moment when I'm telling you, hey, this is who I am. And I really don't want to hear about who you are, because this is about me. This moment's about me. So listening skills and making sure that you're focusing on the person who's coming out.
Yes, definitely that. A lot of personal blocks that I've had have been about questions that tend to come off more as criticisms, like backhanded questions about my identity and such. Like those are things that I'd say to avoid.
Thanks to both of you for your responses. The next question that the panel, the student leaders in the LGBT club created is, what is one thing instructors and staff at Inver can do to support trans students? And we have Fen.
So a lot of what I have to say on like what professors can do does really tie in with what Saby was talking about earlier with that first day. As somebody who uses they, them pronouns, which are not as much in the public spotlight a lot today, one of the things that I've noticed is that like people won't say their pronouns at all. It won't get brought up by the teacher, and then other students won't bring it up. And so I'll be halfway through the class and I'll be like, hi, I use they, them pronouns. And that like dissonance that's created of like me being the only student who uses pronouns kind of already outs me as like trans, which can be uncomfortable for a lot of students. We just want to feel like just another kid in the class. The other big thing is also with the name list, because as a trans student, I've had to go up to professors on the first day of class and be like, hey, my name on your list is not going to be what I would like to be called. Please don't call out that name. And if students don't have that opportunity, they will often get called a dead name and they will have to correct the teacher. And then the whole class knows their dead name, which is not the point of a preferred name. And that can be really uncomfortable and really hard. So by allowing that space for people to change their name before you're calling that out, and providing that like space to give pronouns at the start, and by providing an example through being the teacher, is really, really great and really important.
Thank you so much, Fen. That really relates to our next question. Why are gender pronouns important? And thanks to Casey for responding to this question.
So the majority of people use pronouns, as mentioned earlier by Dr. Saby. Some people don't, and that's perfectly normal. But a lot of people use gender pronouns. So like when you're talking about the majority of people, you have to refer to them with certain pronouns. And the reason that they're so important, like specifically to trans people, is that when you don't use the correct pronouns and you misgender them or you use them incorrectly, it can cause discomfort and harm to the person you are misgendering. Like as you as a cis person, or the cis people in the audience, would feel if somebody misgendered you. It's the very similar feeling.
Thank you so much, Casey. Our next question is, what experience made you think about gender identity more? When did you first become aware that there were gender identities in addition to cis identities? And Fen is going to help us by responding to this question.
Yeah, so there were like a couple of moments for me personally. The big one was in my 8th grade year, right before I was a freshman in high school. We had the club activities, like these are all the clubs you can join in high school, woo. And I actually was friends with the leader of our GSA. And I went to the first meeting and it was like, hi, my name is Naomi and I use they, them pronouns. And before, when I had met them, they were using she, her pronouns. And I was like, they, them pronouns, what is this? Like, this is so new. And seeing like how they defined their own gender identity and how like it was so intrinsically tied not to a label or like their body parts, but how they felt about themselves was like really eye-opening for me to be like, wow, there's something else outside of this other than like girl, boy, dresses, pants, pink, blue. There's other colors, there's other genders. It's a visibility is super important too, because I never would have figured that out. And I didn't figure that out until freshman year of high school, which is sad to me that I didn't see that that wasn't visible to me beforehand. I know that that probably would have impacted my youth a lot more if I'd seen it earlier on.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Fen. I really appreciate you sharing and appreciate all the sharing so far. The next question is, what is one thing you wish people knew about trans folks? We're going to start with Casey and then Fen will respond.
So like I mentioned earlier, I think something that is really like the real blockage when it comes to cis people understanding trans experiences is the fact that they don't understand like how it feels to be misgendered. I think that reflecting about that for yourself and like thinking, how would I feel if somebody misgendered me, helps you really understand the experience that we go through as trans people.
Yeah, for sure. For me, the big one is the difference between body dysmorphia and gender dysphoria. So some trans people will experience what's called gender dysphoria, which is where the body that you're in does not align with your gender identity, that idea you have of yourself. So for example, like me personally, I have gender dysphoria about my chest. I will be getting top surgery to give myself a masculine chest to fit better into my own gender identity. Surgeries, hormone therapies are all things that trans individuals will go through to match that gender identity that they have in their head. Body dysmorphia is that idea that you look at yourself and you see the parts of you as being distorted or different. And they are not the same thing. Gender dysphoria and body dysmorphia come from two very different places. And equating those two can be really, really harmful as well to trans folks. It's really frustrating to deal with that as somebody who's trans and who's had that question posed to them of like, are you sure it's not just body dysmorphia? Like, are you sure like you need this? It can be really hurtful and harmful for us. And I think that's something that I would love more cis people to A, look into and be understanding about it, but B, just also be aware that they are two different things and they come from different spaces.
Absolutely. Fen, thank you so much for sharing. The student leaders wanted to have a closing question that was celebratory and positive in celebration of today's holiday. So today we are celebrating Trans Day of Visibility. What are your favorite things about transness or trans communities? and each student is going to respond. We're going to start with Casey to Feck.
So thinking about Trans Day of Visibility and like my favorite parts about the community and being trans, I think the best part for me personally is the fact that like the community is so open to everybody. I mean, of course, everybody has their different experiences, but a lot of people in the community embrace that and like celebrate that. And even though we have these differences and different experiences, we always seem to find something we have in common. So that's my favorite thing.
I didn't fully hear who was supposed to be next in that, but yeah, going off of that, the contrary can also be very true. Like the experiences that we all share, like my personal favorite thing about the trans community, trans masc specifically, as like trans masc people like myself, there is a specific trend of when testosterone is prescribed to fix or not fix, but balance out the hormones in a way that more fits gender identity, etc. One of the things that a lot of trans men like myself especially do is they will keep track of how deep their voice can get on testosterone. And I absolutely love that. I love the sharing in the celebratoriness. If captions are saying that's not a word. But yeah, this sharing in the celebration of that, the fact that we have that unity and the experiences we've had, the unity in that is my favorite thing about the community.
Yeah, that like mutual celebration of each other's identities is like super, super great. For me, I love how like individual it is too, because like speaking as a non-binary person, there's a lot of ways to interpret non-binary. I know non-binary people who are like, yeah, I like feel like I have gender identity, but it's just outside this binary. Or there's non-binary people who are like, I feel like I'm a little bit of both. Me myself as a non-binary person, I feel like my gender is just a bottomless void. It's something, I don't know what, and I'm comfortable with that. And that requires a really deep level of self-reflection that I love. I find that trans people are very self-reflective and they know themselves deeply as people because we've had to do a lot of deep soul searching. And I find that is just beautiful. And I love that so much.
Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing and for making yourselves vulnerable. I think that the hard part about doing education around climates that are inclusive and celebratory of trans people is often trans people have to share really vulnerable things about themselves. So I just want to thank you for the courage and for the sake of enhancing and moving towards this gender expansive climate together that you brought yourselves in this way to this leadership role today and shared and were vulnerable. So thank you for answering the questions that we had predetermined. We had 2 additional questions come in that were submitted. The first question is, what is the best way to ask about a student's pronouns? And any of the student leaders can choose to respond to that one.
Personally, I see just asking as a really great way. And I know that that's a vulnerable space for teachers too, to be like, I'm not sure how to do this. I don't know like what I'm doing. And I think one of the things to keep in mind is that can also be a really vulnerable space for us as students. And so that shared vulnerability is going to do 2 things. It's going to really open us up to help trust and to be like, they want to respect my pronouns. This is great. And B, that's also going to open you up as a professor that that student can then trust in the future for other issues on campus. Like if there is no gender neutral bathroom and they know that you're a safe option who wants to understand, that can come ask. So just being like, hey, I want to be respectful. What pronouns do you use? Super simple. It doesn't need to be like this whole big thing. Yeah, and that's my take. I'd love to hear the other student leaders' views on that as well.
So I think that when we talk about asking for somebody's pronouns, I think that honestly you should be asking, of course, but if you don't know. But as professors, if we do make sure to engage in the introductory exercises and introducing ourselves with our pronouns, then you don't really need to go through that process of asking, because there is a problem with asking, is that if you ask one person out of a group of your entire students, you're separating them from the group, which might make them feel like, oh, they can tell that I'm different, and that might put them in a very uncomfortable position.
I also one of my favorite ways that I've seen it done is if you're the type for a communication sheet. I believe this was mentioned earlier, but putting that on there is a very simple way to go about getting that information without actually asking yourself if you're not comfortable with doing it yourself. Like I in general prefer doing things like that over a form of text where I can proofread and think about the thing before it comes out of my mouth. Like I like texting over phone calls for that reason. And that is a great way to utilize the proofreading, I guess, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much, everyone. Could we please go over how to properly pronounce the various pronouns? Student leaders, what advice do you give for folks who maybe don't know how to pronounce yet?
So as somebody who uses neopronouns, which are a bit different than your typical pronouns, it's really interesting, because looking over like the script we had for the role play today, the student in the script also used they them pronouns, but it wasn't spelled the same. So I think that the best way to ask someone like, hey, how do you pronounce your pronouns, is just to ask. And if you don't have the opportunity to ask, looking up common neopronouns, and because online there are a lot of great resources that can tell you how to pronounce those things, if you can't ask the student or the person you're asking.
Yeah, and if like singling out that student, you're worried that that's going to put them in a space of vulnerability that might be uncomfortable, like that is totally okay. Yeah, like the internet is a really great resource, not only for teachers, but also like anyone, because there are such massive trans communities and queer communities online now. That can be a really great space to be like, hey, I just need a little help. And most of the time, a lot of trans individuals are going to be super empathetic because you want to learn more, and that's positive rather than like, you know, negative.
Thank you so much. Student leaders, I just want to say that in all my years, this has been one of the most authentic and courageous panels that I've seen. So I wanted to thank you for your efforts and your courage and your sharing. That concludes our event for today. Unless any of the event planners have any closing comments, we'll look to Casey, Jack, Fenn. Any other thoughts before we close out? I have one call to action for anybody on this call today. I'm sorry, Fenn,
I just wanted to say thank you to all of the adults and leaders that came on. It really made my heart like do some really big hiccups, because I never would have expected any teachers to actually like want to include me, which is like so nihilistic to say out loud, but it really feels good knowing that you guys want to make college and education spaces more inclusive. That is like super great. And thank you also for your vulnerability in saying like, hey, this is something I don't know. Like it's really, really great. And it's really lovely to see.
Thank you so much, Fen. I want to thank the LGBT Plus Club for putting on this event. My call to action for everyone on this call, today is Trans Day of Visibility. I'd like you to think of one way that you can support the national trans climate, whether that is donating money, donating time, whether that is addressing some of the legislation that is showing up that is targeting trans youth. I want you to think about what is that one way for you to focus some of your learning, some of your energy, some of your access, some of your privilege that you have, whether it's to resources or decision-making tables. Think about that one direction to be able to, not the band, but the one focus point to be able to direct your energy and your resources so that we can make change gradually together for the larger landscape as well. I want to thank everyone for their time, their energy, and I wish you an amazing rest of your week. Thank you for helping us celebrate Trans Day of Visibility together. Goodbye, everyone.